It is November 1519, and the first Spanish soldiers walk into Tenochtitlan. The Aztec warriors lining the causeways stand 5 inches taller. 5 inches, raw skeletal height, not headdress. These Mexica fighters carry 8 to 12 kilograms more muscle on a diet with almost no animal protein. Copal smoke drifts from temple braziers across the island capital of the Aztec Empire. By every law of modern sports nutrition, these bodies should not exist, but they stood taller, denser, faster on maize, beans, amaranth, and lake algae. Everything you were taught about protein was wrong. Subscribe for the empire the textbooks tried to bury. Start with the bones themselves between 1978 and the present day. The Templo Mayor project, directed by Eduardo Matos Moctezuma and later Leonardo López Luján, has recovered hundreds of skeletal remains from Tenochtitlan and its surrounding settlements. The data these bones carry is unambiguous. Adult male Mexica remains from the basin of Mexico in the 15th century averaged between 168 and 172 centimeters in stature. Place that figure next to the European baseline of the identical period. Spanish males of the late 15th century averaged between 160 and 164 centimeters. English and French peasants, the men who would have filled the rank-and-file infantry of any European campaign, often barely cleared 158. The gap between a Mexica eagle warrior and a Castilian foot soldier was not subtle. It was the difference between a modern welterweight and a modern middleweight fighter. You can feel that difference when 2 men stand side by side. You can see it across a battlefield. And the paradox that makes this gap remarkable is not the measurement itself. It is what sat on the plate. Medieval Europe had cattle, pigs, sheep, goats, chickens, dairy herds, and centuries of pastoral tradition. The Mexica had none of these animals. Not one cow, not one goat. No dairy of any kind. The largest domesticated animal in the Aztec world was the turkey, the huixolotl, and turkey meat was largely reserved for nobility, for ritual feasts, for the Tatoani's table. The common Mexica warrior, the man whose femur measures longer than his Spanish opponents, built that frame on plants, insects, algae, and one nutritional principle that modern biochemistry did not formally articulate until the 20th century. That principle is amino acid complementarity, and by the time European science described it in a laboratory, the Aztecs had been engineering it into every meal served across an empire of roughly 200,000 people for at least 200 years. The central answer to how they did it is not mysterious. It is mechanical. It lives in the chemistry of the tortilla. The base of every Mexica meal was maize, but not maize as you know it, not the sweet corn sold in cellophane at your supermarket. This was nixtamalized maize, soaked overnight in an alkaline solution of water and mineral lime, calcium hydroxide, then rinsed, ground on a stone metate, and pressed into tortillas, or stirred into atole. Nixtamalization is a process the Mexica inherited from at least 3,000 years of Mesoamerican refinement, and it does something that no European grain preparation of the 15th century could replicate. It breaks down the pericarp, the tough outer hull of the kernel, and in doing so releases niacin, a B vitamin that is chemically locked inside raw, untreated corn. This matters because without niacin, a maize-heavy diet causes pellagra, a disease whose symptoms include skin lesions, chronic diarrhea, cognitive deterioration, and eventually death. When European colonists adopted maize in the 17th and 18th centuries but ignored the alkaline soak, dismissing it as primitive superstition, pellagra swept through rural populations in southern Italy, Spain, and the American South. Tens of thousands died of a disease that had never existed in Mesoamerica. The Aztecs did not know the word niacin. They did not need to. The knowledge was already inside the process, accumulated over centuries of observation, harvest failure, sickness and correction, encoded not in a textbook, but in the hands of every woman who knelt at a mete before dawn. Nixtamalization also does something subtler, and arguably more important. It increases the bioavailability of the amino acids inside maize protein, specifically lysine, which untreated corn carries in insufficient quantity for complete human nutrition. Here is where the engineering gets deliberate. Maize protein is high in methionine but low in lysine. Bean protein is high in lysine but low in methionine. Eaten separately, each is incomplete. Eaten together, and the Mexica ate them together at virtually every meal, they form a complete protein containing every essential amino acid the human body requires to synthesize muscle, repair connective tissue, and sustain immune function. Tortillas folded around black beans. Tamales stuffed with bean paste. Atole served alongside stewed legumes. This was not coincidence. This was a dietary architecture refined across generations of empirical testing at the scale of an entire civilization, and it delivered results that the European protein model, built on animal flesh, animal fat, and animal milk, could not match in the bodies of its own soldiers. Now layer on what the Aztec plate carried beyond the maize and bean foundation. The second pillar was amaranth, huautli in Nahuatl, and if you have never heard of this grain, the reason is not accidental. After the Spanish conquest, colonial authorities actively suppressed amaranth cultivation, partly because the grain was woven into Aztec religious ceremony, mixed with honey and shaped into effigies of Huitzilopochtli during certain festivals, and partly because a colonized population that can feed itself cheaply and completely on a grain that grows in 90 days on marginal soil is a population far harder to subjugate through hunger. The suppression worked. Amaranth nearly vanished from the Mesoamerican food system for 3 centuries, but the nutritional profile that made it dangerous to colonial power is precisely what makes it extraordinary to modern science. Amaranth contains between 13 and 15% complete protein by dry weight, higher than wheat, rice, oats, or barley. It carries lysine in concentrations that dwarf other cereals. It is rich in iron, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and zinc. A single cup of cooked amaranth delivers nearly 30% of an adult's recommended daily iron intake. The Códice Mendoza, the colonial-era tribute register that itemizes what conquered provinces owed to the Tlatoani, lists amaranth alongside maize and beans as one of the 3 foundational staple tributes of the Aztec Empire. Provinces shipped thousands of fanegas of amaranth to Tenochtitlan each year. This was not a supplement. This was a pillar of imperial nutritional infrastructure, grown, taxed, transported, and distributed as deliberately as any military supply chain you have ever studied. The Aztecs fed an army on a grain that the conquerors tried to erase from the earth. That grain is now sold in health food stores at $12 a bag and marketed as a superfood discovery. It was state policy in Tenochtitlan before Columbus left the port of Palos. And then there was spirulina, or rather, tecuhtlatl, the blue-green algae that Mexica harvesters skimmed from the alkaline surface of Lake Texcoco using fine mesh nets. Picture the process. You are standing on a wooden canoe at dawn, the green surface of the lake stretching toward the snow line of Iztaccíhuatl. You draw a fine cotton net through the water, and what collects is a dark blue-green paste, dense, vegetal, rich with the mineral signature of a volcanic lake. You press it into flat cakes, you dry it in the sun, and you sell it in the Tianquistli of Tlatelolco alongside maize, chili, tomatoes, and wild game. Spanish chroniclers, including Bernal Diaz del Castillo, described these cakes in his account of the Great Market. The Spanish found tecuhtlatl revolting. They compared it to a kind of bitter cheese and refused to eat it. What they were rejecting, and this is a detail you should sit with, was a food containing up to 65% protein by dry weight, carrying a full essential amino acid profile, dense concentrations of B vitamins, including B12, and iron levels that rival red meat gram for gram. A warrior who ate a single tecuhtlatl cake with his morning tortillas consumed a protein load equivalent to a modern whey shake, without the cow, without the processing plant, without the plastic bottle. Think about what that means. You are a Mexica warrior in 1510. You eat a green cake and 2 tortillas. You have just ingested more complete protein than a Spanish knight eating salted pork and bread. Modern nutritional science has spent 4 decades rediscovering spirulina as a performance food. NASA has studied it as a candidate for long-duration spaceflight nutrition. The Aztecs were pressing it into cakes and selling it in open-air markets half a millennium ago. This is not primitive. This is a civilization that solved complete human protein provision without domesticated livestock before Europe understood that protein existed as a distinct macronutrient. If this is the kind of detail you come here for, a like genuinely helps. Now consider what the Aztec system removed. The height advantage was not only about what went into the body, it was about what did not. Medieval European urban life, in Seville, in Toledo, in London, in Paris, was defined by biological contamination at every level. Open sewers ran through city centers, drinking water mixed with human and animal waste. Intestinal parasites, hookworm, roundworm, whipworm, were endemic in all social classes. A 2004 study examining 15th century skeletal remains from Castile found evidence of chronic iron deficiency anemia, cribra orbitalia, and dental enamel hypoplasia in over 40% of sampled individuals. Markers not of famine, but of sustained childhood malnutrition driven by parasitic infection and contaminated water. The average Castilian soldier who stepped onto a ship bound for the New World in 1519 had survived smallpox or measles, carried intestinal worms, suffered vitamin D deficiency from indoor living, and had subsisted on a diet so nutritionally narrow, bread, salted pork, ale, occasional cheese, that his linear growth had been chemically stunted before his 6th birthday. The Aztec warrior standing across the causeway had grown up inside a system engineered to do the opposite at every stage of development. Think about what you take for granted every morning. You turn on a faucet and clean water flows. You flush a toilet and waste disappears. These are systems you never think about, and they are the systems that determined whether a 15th century child grew to full genetic height or stopped short. Tenochtitlan had no open sewers. Human waste was collected in canoes and transported to the Chiapas, the raised agricultural platforms built on the lakebed, where it was composted over months and recycled into fertilizer. Urine was collected separately and used in textile production. The city employed an estimated 1,000 waste collectors who swept streets before dawn. Fresh water arrived through a double-barreled stone aqueduct from the springs of Chapultepec, one channel delivering water while the other was drained and cleaned. Hernán Cortés himself, in his second letter to Emperor Charles V, described Tenochtitlan as more orderly and cleaner than any city in Spain. And you have to understand what that admission cost a man who was actively planning to destroy the place. This sanitation infrastructure accomplished something invisible but decisive. It broke the fecal-oral transmission cycle that crippled European childhood development. When you eliminate chronic parasitic load from a child's gut during the first 5 years of life, you do not merely prevent illness, you unlock growth. Nutrients that hookworm or roundworm would otherwise hijack are redirected to bone elongation, muscle protein synthesis, and immune maturation. The 5-inch height gap between Mexica warriors and Spanish soldiers was not written in genetics. It was written in plumbing, in waste collection, in the engineering of clean water. Modern public health research confirms this mechanism. A 2008 meta-analysis published in The Lancet demonstrated that deworming programs in developing countries produce measurable increases in childhood height within 2 years. The Aztecs achieved the same outcome 5 centuries earlier, not with pharmaceuticals, but with infrastructure. And layered on top of nutrition and sanitation was a physical culture unlike anything in contemporary Europe. From roughly age 12, Mexica boys entered either the Telpocali, the commoner military academy, or the Calmecac, the elite school reserved for noble and priestly lineages. Both institutions demanded years of relentless physical conditioning: running, swimming, load carrying over mountain trails, combat drilling with the macuahoodle, the obsidian-edged wooden sword capable, according to multiple Spanish accounts, of severing a horse's head, canoes sprinting across the lake, and carrying heavy stone and timber up the steep faces of temple pyramids as daily labor. The Telpocali curriculum functioned as a 4-year athletic development program fused with tactical military apprenticeship. You trained every day. You ran distances that would qualify as competitive cross-country in a modern university. You fought with real weapons under real supervision. And you did it on a nutritional foundation already optimized for maximal growth and recovery. The recovery infrastructure matched the output. After training, after battle, after injury, warriors used the temazcal, the Aztec sweat bath, a domed stone chamber heated by volcanic rock, and infused with steam from herbal preparations documented in the Codice Florentino. Eduardo Matos Moctezuma has identified temazcal structures adjacent to military barracks, temple complexes, and residential quarters across the Valley of Mexico. The herbs used, including plants with demonstrated anti-inflammatory and analgesic properties, reduce joint inflammation and maintain the connective tissue mobility essential for a warrior who fought in close combat with edged weapons. Modern sports medicine uses heat therapy, compression, anti-inflammatory botanicals, and active recovery protocols. The Aztec temazcal combined all four in a single stone room, accessible to every warrior who served the empire. The cost of this system was real, and you should not romanticize it away. The physical demands were extreme. Boys who could not keep pace were publicly humiliated. Training injuries were common, and the caloric requirement of a warrior in active preparation, estimated by some scholars at 3,500 to 4,000 calories per day, placed enormous pressure on the food distribution networks that stretched from the chinampas of Xochimilco to the tribute warehouses of the capital. Every tortilla a warrior ate carried the labor of a farmer, the engineering of a chinampa builder, the logistics of a bureaucracy that tracked caloric output like a modern quartermaster corps. The height of a Mexica warrior was not a genetic lottery. It was the output of a state, deliberate, layered, and engineered from the soil to the skeleton. Hollywood will tell you the Aztecs were savages, drinking blood from skulls. The archaeological record, the actual bones, the actual documents, the actual chemical analysis of dental calculus and collagen isotope ratios, tells you they operated one of the most sophisticated, integrated nutritional and public health systems in the pre-industrial world. The Codice Florentino, compiled by the Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún, from direct interviews with Mexica elders in the decades following the conquest, catalogs over 1,200 medicinal plants known to Aztec healers. It records dietary prescriptions specific to pregnant women, nursing mothers, growing children, the elderly, and warriors in active training. It describes food preparation adjusted for season, altitude, physical demand, and stage of life. This was not folk memory preserved by accident. This was institutional knowledge, maintained by the Calmecac, transmitted from master to student across generations, integrated into a public health philosophy where nutrition, sanitation, physical conditioning, and medical treatment functioned as components of a single deliberate system. Modern pharmacological research has begun to validate what that system already knew. A 2015 study in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed the anti-inflammatory properties of several plants listed in the Codice Florentino for post-exertion recovery. The same plants infused into temazcal steam, the Mexica, had no mass spectrometer. They had something arguably more powerful: centuries of controlled empirical observation, passed from healer to student without interruption, refined by outcomes observed in living bodies across an empire. And that system produced warriors who were, by every measurable skeletal metric available to modern bioarchaeology, physically superior to the Europeans who destroyed them. Let that settle. You live in a world that spends billions of dollars a year on protein supplements, sports nutrition research, and athletic development programs. The Aztecs achieved comparable or superior physical outcomes, measured in bone density, stature, and skeletal robustness using sunlight, volcanic soil, lake water, and the patient intelligence of 10,000 unnamed women grinding maize at dawn. The Spanish brought horses, steel, gunpowder, and epidemic disease. The Aztecs brought 5 inches of height, denser cortical bone, fewer skeletal markers of childhood nutritional stress, and a protein architecture that fed 250,000 people without a single head of cattle. Spain conquered through technology and biological warfare. The Aztecs built through nutrition, infrastructure, and systematic human development. One empire optimized for extraction, the other optimized for the human body itself. The result speaks in the bones, and the bones do not lie. If what brings you here is the real engineering, how these people fed themselves, trained their bodies, built systems that outperformed everything Europe could offer, then this channel was built for you. Subscribe, and you will see what comes next. The next time you crack open a protein shake or scan the amino acid profile on a supplement label, consider this. 500 years ago, A Mexican woman in Tenochtitlan pressed a tortilla from nixtamalized maize, folded it around black beans and a handful of toasted amaranth, and handed it to her 12-year-old son before he ran 5 kilometers barefoot to his military school. She could not name lysine. She could not spell bioavailability. She did not need to. The knowledge was in the recipe, quiet, deliberate, carried in the hands, and it built the tallest warriors on either side of the Atlantic.